Get her off my stage. She'll damage the Steinway. That was all it took, one public insult from a famous pianist, and the world almost missed a miracle. Arya Bellamy, a quiet, simple woman mocked in front of a crowd, said nothing in return. She simply sat at the piano, and when her fingers touched the keys, the world held its breath. What followed wasn't just music. It was a movement. This is the story of how a woman with no fame and no stage gave humanity something it had forgotten how to do. Listen. Before you watch the full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Keep her away from the Steinway. This isn't a charity recital. The voice cracked through the concert hall like a whip, arrogant and sharp, slicing through the gentle hum of pre-show chatter. Gasps fluttered across the room as heads turned. At the center of it all, beneath the harsh glow of a crystal chandelier, a young woman stood motionless. Her hand hovered just inches above the polished black surface of a grand piano. She did not flinch. She did not speak. But something in the set of her chin, delicate and steady, refused to yield. The man who had spoken, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit, stepped forward. Victor Bell, a name etched into classical music history. The kind of performer who could silence rooms with the press of a single key. His silver hair and icy blue eyes radiated command. People bowed when he entered spaces like this. His hands were insured for millions. And now those same hands pointed down dismissively at the woman before him. She doesn't belong on that bench, he said, half to the stage manager, half to the dozens of elite guests already seated. Sir, came a tentative voice from behind the curtain, she just asked to touch the keys. She's not even scheduled to. I don't care, Victor barked. Get her off my stage. The woman still hadn't moved. Though her body was small and slender, her hands were elegant and long, the hands of someone meant to create sound. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Her voice floated across the stage like a leaf on still water. I didn't mean to interrupt. No need to be dramatic, Victor replied coldly, already turning his back. From the wings, someone recorded on their phone. The security guard hadn't meant to film, not really, but something about the woman's stillness made his thumb press record almost involuntarily. She stepped back, with no shaking in her hands, no moisture in her eyes. The hush in the room deepened, not respectful silence, but that uncomfortable, sticky quiet that follows cruelty in public. People shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. A few whispered. Then she turned and walked away. Nobody knew her name. Not yet. 2 years earlier, Arya Bellamy had been just another invisible figure in the marble-lined corridors of Eastbrook Conservatory. The kind of place where students' last names mattered more than their talents. Most students came from wealth ambassadors' children, retired ballet legends, sons and daughters of global conductors. Arya came with nothing. No fancy family, no connections. Just a plain caseworker who dropped her off at the campus gate and a single suitcase filled with threadbare clothes, a metronome with no battery, and a half-broken music player. The conservatory didn't technically admit her. She was there under a program called Silent Observer, a fancy way of saying she could listen but not participate. She soaked up music from outside practice rooms, through doors left ajar, from vibrations in the floorboards when pianists practiced upstairs. She spent her afternoons sitting cross-legged in the hallway outside Professor Alcott's lecture room, tracing music with her fingers in the air, every muscle in her hands twitching. It was Alcott who first noticed. At first, he dismissed it as a coincidence. But one evening, as rain poured so loudly on the conservatory's arched glass roof that even practice became impossible, he saw her sitting there, hands suspended midair, following a silent rhythm. He leaned down. Are you mimicking my lecture? I was trying, she said. I'm sorry. For what? He asked. She hesitated. For being here. Alcott blinked. The hallway smelled of old stone and varnished wood. Thunder growled outside. Don't be sorry, he said. Be precise. From that day forward, when his students had gone and the lights dimmed low, Alcott stayed behind. He taught her not with printed scores but with stories, describing the way a piece should feel. He pressed her fingers into wood to explain chords, tapped out rhythms on her knuckles, hummed scales until she could feel pitch. And Arya absorbed everything with terrifying speed. But talent in a place like Eastbrook was not enough. When the conservatory announced its Young Virtuoso Showcase, Alcott filled out the application for her himself. He didn't list her background. He listed her name, her skill, and a recommendation so glowing it bordered on a prayer. She was allowed to audition, technically. Her assigned time slot was 7:45 a.m., before most faculty had even arrived. The piano she was told to use was the old, slightly out-of-tune baby grand in the East rehearsal wing, not the concert Steinway. A single judge came to listen. No audience. No welcome. Arya sat in silence for a long time before placing her fingers on the keys. When she began to play, she didn't just reproduce music, she summoned it, transformed it. The piece, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, rose from the piano like a living thing, massive, aching, and unspeakably tender. When she was done, the judge nodded curtly and left without a word. She never received a call back, and Arya disappeared from the conservatory's halls. What she didn't know, what no one told her, was that someone had been watching. The janitor who cleaned the wing every morning had paused outside the door. That night, he uploaded the video he'd quietly taken. Titled it, "Unknown Woman Rejected by Conservatory Plays Rachmaninoff by Heart." The video didn't explode immediately. But a few days later, a piano blogger in Berlin reposted it. Then a music therapist in Argentina. Then a retired musician in Brooklyn. The shares tripled by the hour. Comments poured in from every continent. "She plays like she's telling her own story," one wrote. "I felt that in my chest." The conservatory board panicked. Not publicly, but behind closed doors. Furious meetings were held. Until an envelope arrived at the conservatory's front desk. Hand-delivered. Gilded edges. From the International Gala of Human Harmony, a global concert broadcast to over 60 countries. This year's theme, Breaking Barriers in Sound. They wanted Arya Bellamy to open the show. The dean choked on his espresso. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. A spotlight had been cast, and for the first time, Arya was no longer a hidden shadow in the back hallway. She would share the same stage as Victor Bell himself. And Victor did not take the news well. "She'll ruin the program's integrity." Victor's voice was low, calm, almost pleasant, too calm, the way a winter wind can be quiet right before it bites. He spoke to the gala's director, an elderly man named Gerard Morrow, whose career had spanned every corner of global music diplomacy. The two were standing near the edge of the stage during a pre-rehearsal walkthrough in Vienna's Grand Harmony Hall. "She's untrained. It's political." "You know it is." Gerard raised an eyebrow. His French-accented voice carried just enough steel to remind Victor he wasn't speaking to a yes-man. "And yet," he said, "the world is waiting to hear her." "Or haven't you seen the numbers?" Victor exhaled, sharp and slow. "This isn't a talent show." "No," Gerard replied, smiling faintly. "It's a reckoning." Somewhere across the city, Arya Bellamy stood barefoot in the quiet of her hotel suite. The floor beneath her toes was cool marble, veined like river branches frozen in time. Professor Alcott had flown with her. Despite no longer holding any official title, he refused to leave her side, even when the conservatory tried to replace him with a flashy manager. "You know," he'd whispered during the flight, "in all my years, I never imagined I'd be flying across the world with the finest pianist I ever taught and one the school never admitted." Arya smiled softly. "They admitted my footsteps. That's something." He chuckled. "You always did play with the quiet kind of defiance." The rehearsal was scheduled for the following afternoon. Arya had not yet touched the piano, not since the day she'd walked off that stage. She hadn't dared. Not because of fear, but because something inside her had shifted. Playing used to be her escape, her way of folding the world into melody when life refused to be kind. But now the world wanted to listen. Not as background noise. Not as indulgence. As truth. And the weight of that was immense. When the moment came, when the doors to the rehearsal hall opened and the spotlight swept down from the rafters like a blade of light, she didn't hesitate. She stepped forward calmly, with Alcott at her side, until her fingers brushed the edge of the piano bench. It was the Steinway concert grand she'd always dreamed of. The finish was cold, smooth, untouched. Her fingers trembled just for a moment, then fell still. And then she sat. Every sound in the hall retreated. Even the dust seemed to pause. She placed her hands on the keys, but she didn't play. She simply held the silence in her palms, stretching it, commanding it, until it bent to her will. Then, with a breath so quiet it barely belonged to her, she began. The notes that spilled out weren't from any known sonata or concerto. They didn't follow a familiar pattern. No famous composer had inked them centuries ago. They were hers, raw, unscored, born in that exact moment. A blend of memory and invention. She began with a single sustained G, soft, uncertain, like a child reaching into a dark room. Then a ripple of notes down the right hand, followed by a broken chord that sounded like sunlight filtered through grief. The left hand moved slowly, deliberately, more felt than heard. Those present, technicians, ushers, even the man fixing a rigging cable, stood frozen. No one gave a cue. No one dared to interrupt. Even Victor, standing near the wings, had stopped mid-sentence when the music began. He didn't move. His eyes narrowed. There was something haunting about it, something unsettling. She's not reading from anything, he thought. Not even muscle memory. This is pure invention. And then it dawned on him, she wasn't broken. He was. The melody morphed, a sudden shift, minor chords now, melancholy notes rising in wounded defiance. Her body leaned forward slightly, as if pulled by invisible threads. Her face was serene, not joyful, not pained, just open, like a door left ajar during a storm. Then, without warning, she stopped mid-chord. Her hands hovered. No resolution. No applause. Just silence. And that silence thundered through the chamber like the aftermath of war. The rehearsal director stepped forward, stunned. Miss Bellamy, will that be your piece for the gala? She tilted her head, considering. No, she said. That was just a warm-up. Victor clenched his jaw. The next day, the gala director received a request from Victor Bell's agent. He wanted to change the performance order. Victor no longer wished to follow Arya's set. He wanted to open instead. The request was denied. Meanwhile, news of Arya's rehearsal leaked. Someone had taken a short audio clip on their phone and posted it to a classical music forum. The clip, just 45 seconds long, was shared over 3 million times in 12 hours. Headlines followed: The Unknown Virtuoso, the woman who silenced a concert hall, Rachmaninoff reincarnated? No, Bellamy begins. Victor spent the night in restless pacing, not out of jealousy, exactly, but fear. Not of her, but of something deeper. Of irrelevance. Of watching his legacy get eclipsed, not by time, but by a woman who played with a kind of purity he hadn't touched in decades. He hadn't played from truth in so long, he'd forgotten what it sounded like. Now, all he had was perfection. She had something else. On the morning of the gala, the Grand Harmony Hall buzzed like a beehive. Diplomats, royalty, philanthropists, critics, and composers filled every velvet seat. The orchestra tuned beneath golden archways. Cameras locked in position. Backstage, Victor warmed up alone. His fingers danced over the keys with practiced flair, every note exact, every tempo obeyed. He didn't realize that, just one room over, Arya sat with her fingers in her lap, doing nothing but breathing. Listening. Mapping the resonance of the concert hall by its breathing. Feeling the vibrations from the floor as the audience shuffled in. Professor Alcott stood beside her, quietly holding her shoulder. Are you afraid? He whispered. She shook her head gently. No, she said. I've already played my hardest song. This one is just truth. He smiled. Then give it to them. She nodded, then stood. A stagehand opened the side curtain. It was time. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed across the opulent auditorium. Please welcome to the stage, Arya Bellamy. A ripple of curiosity ran through the audience. Some leaned forward, brows raised. Others tilted their heads toward their programs, flipping pages to find the unfamiliar name. A few whispered to their neighbors. Most had never heard of her. Those who had seen the viral video sat motionless, anticipation bubbling under their skin like a drawn breath that couldn't be released. The house lights dimmed. A single beam of warm gold spilled down from the rafters onto the stage, illuminating the grand Steinway that stood like a monolith of sound, waiting to be awakened. And then she appeared. Not in a dramatic entrance. No fanfare. No sweeping dress. Just Arya, in a simple black gown, one hand gently resting on Professor Alcott's arm. The audience watched in reverent silence as she approached the piano, her steps slow but without a hint of fear. Alcott guided her gently to the bench, then stepped back into the shadows, like a guardian who had fulfilled his purpose. Arya sat for a moment. She didn't move. Her hands lay in her lap, and her head bowed slightly, not in submission, but in communion, like a priest before the altar, or a soldier before the storm. The silence became sacred. And then, barely audible, she inhaled. Her fingers rose and hovered. And they began to play. But what came wasn't a recognizable prelude, not Chopin, not Beethoven, not Bach. No one in the audience could name it because it had no name. It was something else, something older than sheet music, deeper than memory. It was a story. The right hand fluttered in ripples across the upper register, delicate notes that danced like raindrops skipping across glass. They were playful, hesitant, childlike. The left hand joined a moment later, slow and rich, anchoring the melody with the gravity of absence and loss. Those in the audience who had seen hardship felt it instantly, the trembling start, the notes stumbling, searching, then suddenly finding clarity, a rising scale that soared briefly triumphant, then collapsed again into minor keys that sounded like unanswered prayers. It was not a performance. It was remembrance. A sigh from the front row broke the air. An ambassador's wife dabbed her cheek with the corner of her glove. A young violinist in the balcony leaned so far forward that his glasses fell from his face and clattered onto the floor below. But no one shushed him. No one moved. Because now Arya's tempo shifted. The chords thickened. Her fingers struck the keys with unexpected power, percussive bursts that thundered like fists pounding against a locked door. Her entire body moved with the sound, shoulders tight, spine bowed. The rhythm became defiant, angry, alive. This was no longer just memory. It was resistance. The music seemed to cry out, I was never given a chance. You looked past me. You shut your doors. But I am still here. Each crescendo struck like a confession. Each diminuendo left a vacuum, drawing the crowd in closer. Even Victor, watching from the green room through a live monitor, had frozen mid-step. He had one hand on the tuning keys of his own piano, but he wasn't touching them now. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes narrowed. She had no sheet music, no orchestra, no conductor, and yet she commanded every soul in the room like a maestro. Halfway through the piece, Arya slowed. Her left hand dropped out entirely, and with her right, she began a single melody, a simple, wistful sequence in E major. It drifted upward, climbing as if trying to touch the stars. She repeated it once, twice, and then she changed it, just slightly. A single note bent downward. Another skipped entirely. And suddenly, those listening understood, this was a lullaby. Those with childhoods full of soft singing, of gentle rocking under moonlight, recognized it at once. And it shattered them. The notes faded. The hall was utterly still. Arya held the final chord so lightly it was almost a breath, then released it into nothing. No motion. No bow. She sat with her hands on her knees, facing the audience, knowing exactly what she'd left in their hearts. And then the thunder came. Applause erupted like a dam bursting. It wasn't polite, it was primal. Chairs scraped backward. Some stood. Others shouted. There were tears in places that had not known weeping in decades. The ovation rolled like a wave, sweeping the room in a fever of awe and disbelief. Cameras panned from face to face, critics, conductors, heads of state, each with expressions torn wide open. A voice cried from the balcony, "Encore!" Another followed, "Arya! Arya!" She didn't rise. She didn't react. She simply turned her face upward toward the lights, as if listening to the sound not with her ears, but with her skin. Backstage, Victor turned from the monitor and poured himself a drink with shaking hands. "They won't remember me tonight," he muttered. "They'll remember her." He wasn't wrong. In the hours that followed, the gala's livestream shattered viewership records. News outlets scrambled for information. Social media exploded with clips, commentary, tributes. Composers posted reaction videos. Critics published emergency editorials calling her performance a once-in-a-century expression of the human spirit. By morning, Arya Bellamy's name was the top trending search in over 20 countries. And she had no idea. In her quiet hotel room, far from the glow of fame, Arya sat cross-legged on the carpet, her hands resting in her lap. Professor Alcott sat across from her, his cup of tea untouched. "Was it enough?" she asked softly. He leaned forward, voice low and reverent. "You didn't just play music, Arya. You changed its shape." She tilted her head. "But I didn't finish the story." He smiled. "No. Because now the world will be asking for more." "Arya Bellamy?" The voice was nervous, breathless, as the man jogged down the marble hallway toward her. She had only just stepped into the side exit of the concert hall, the last embers of applause still echoing faintly in the air behind her. Alcott, ever at her side, stepped forward instinctively, but the man stopped a few respectful feet away. "My name's Anthony Liu," he said. "I'm with Deutsche Harmonia Records. We just saw your performance, and I don't even have words." Arya nodded slowly. "I don't know what your management situation is," he stammered, "but we'd like to discuss signing you. Global tour, exclusive rights to produce your first studio album." "Anything you want, name it." Arya said nothing. Her fingers quietly twisted a loose thread on her dress. The wind moved faintly through the corridor's stained glass windows. Alcott raised his hand gently. "She'll speak when she's ready." And she did. But it wasn't the answer expected. "Do you know what the word prelude means?" she asked softly. Anthony blinked. It means, well, the beginning, right? It means an introduction to something larger. Something that hasn't happened yet." She turned her head back toward the echoing auditorium behind them. Tonight wasn't the story. It was just the prelude. The man stood frozen, his business card slipping slightly in his hand, forgotten. By the next morning, a flurry of other offers followed, every label, every symphony. Private invitations from cultural ministries, royal patrons, heads of major conservatories. Some offered money. Others offered entire stages in her name. And yet Arya answered none of them. She sat with Professor Alcott on a train to Salzburg, where a quiet retreat awaited her. She requested a cabin with no screens, only windows that opened so she could hear the wind and the passing countryside. As the landscape rolled by, she pressed her palm against the glass and whispered, "They want me to play songs I haven't lived yet." Alcott smiled faintly. "You've always played from your scars. But now, maybe it's time to play from your healing." Back at the conservatory, Victor Bell remained behind. He had not spoken publicly since the gala. His agent issued a carefully worded statement about artistic reflection and respecting new voices in the musical world. But behind the scenes, Victor sat watching replays of Arya's performance on an old monitor. He didn't speak as he watched. He only listened, over and over again. And each time, a different note stabbed deeper, because there were things Arya played that he'd once understood. Before the fame, before the pressure, before the perfection, before every note had to be clean and every smile timed to curtain calls. He had forgotten how to put his heart into the keys. Arya hadn't. She'd never had a choice. The conservatory scrambled to rewrite its policies. Donations poured in with conditions: create accessible programs, open auditions to all, fund scholarships for non-traditional students. What had been a hidden problem in their culture was now exposed. And Arya? She was silent. Weeks passed. The offers kept coming. One morning, Alcott found her at a small upright piano in the village cafe near their Salzburg retreat, playing for no one in particular. A child sat cross-legged nearby, tracing the floor tiles with a toy car. An old man read the newspaper, not even realizing who she was. She played anyway. Not for applause. Not for record deals. For the story. A reporter tracked her down eventually, young, persistent, respectful. She asked Arya if she could record a short segment for a documentary. Arya hesitated but agreed only if they filmed the piano, not her face. "I don't want this to be about me," she said. "I want people to hear themselves in the music." "But your story matters," the reporter insisted. "You've broken barriers." Arya smiled gently. "No. I just reminded people that silence doesn't mean absence." That clip alone garnered 10 million views. Among those who saw it was a teenage girl in rural Texas who had always been told music wasn't for her. After watching Arya, she began experimenting with sound in her own way. She sent Arya a letter with the help of her sister. It ended with, "You made space for me." Arya held the letter for a long time. Then, for the first time since the gala, she sat to compose again. The new piece came to her not in a storm, but in a whisper. It began with a simple phrase, 3 notes, no more, repeated with minor variation. She built around it slowly, layering intervals like vines curling around a trellis. This time, it was not sorrowful, nor angry, nor desperate. It was thankful. When she played it for Alcott, he closed his eyes halfway through and turned his face away, not to hide tears, but to honor the moment. "You've written a bridge," he said softly when she finished. She looked puzzled. "A bridge between who you were and who you've become." She titled the piece Sightlines. It was played for the first time in a modest chamber hall in Paris, not announced in advance, just a quiet performance for 100 guests. No live stream. No press. Just sound. And those who were lucky enough to be there never forgot it. They said it felt like finding a path in the dark and realizing you had known the way all along. The simple woman they once mocked now changed the world with each note she played.